Hi, everybody. Welcome back. For those of you who are new to my channel, I am Janae Cherie, and I'm here to tell stories. Well, recently we have been going on my very exciting cancer journey, which was an unplanned journey, to be fair. And today we're going to talk about the very interesting diversion of getting ready for chemo and deciding to do IVF and embryo freezing before the chemo starts. So let's talk about how we got here, shall we? So the start of this journey is that I found out from my doctors that there is a medium risk of going into menopause early during the chemotherapy process. Well, what is a medium risk, you ask? Well, let me tell you. It is a 20% to 80% chance of going into menopause, which has got to be the biggest and most ridiculous span I've ever heard of in terms of trying to make a decision based off of something. But that's what they told me. And they did say, of course, there's a variety of factors, your age and everything else. And given that I am 34, they did say that it's very possible and very probable that I may end up going into menopause. There is a possibility that after chemo, your body will revert back to its normal cadence and menses. But there is a pretty, like I said, medium risk, 20 to 80% chance that you'll go into permanent menopause. So as part of this conversation, we started talking about options. And this is where I learned, very interesting, California, and I think it was 12 or 13 other states, require that insurance offers the option for egg freezing or semen freezing free of charge for those that are going to be undergoing major procedures that may result in infertility. Fascinating, right? First time government's required anything that actually might help people. Just kidding. Let's not talk politics. That's a terrible idea. But very interesting. So we started talking about egg freezing and what that would look like. Well, as part of that discussion, my doctor also looked at my insurance coverage. But lo and behold, I actually have IVF coverage through my work, which is amazing. I had no idea because we weren't planning on trying to get pregnant anytime soon. But I had no idea that the company offered that. And that's a huge, I don't think I've ever worked for a company that offered IVF coverage at all. And my company covers like 70% of the cost. It's pretty fantastic. So then we started talking about the options. Do we do egg freezing free through the state coverage? Do we do embryo freezing through work coverage? What is the right logical answer? And for me, it boiled down to knowing what I had. So I started asking my doctor questions. So why would somebody choose egg freezing over embryo freezing? And well, the obvious answer, of course, is that the egg freezing is often more affordable. Most people don't have IVF coverage. Completely understandable. But then there's a other element that she brought up that I hadn't even thought of, is that a lot of people do their egg freezing, and that's just kind of that last hope where if things don't go back to normal after chemo, if maybe everything does return back to normal and they try to have a baby naturally and maybe that all goes well. But she said a lot of people just use it as kind of their lifeline. But the reality is what they explained to me is that you extract the eggs, you then have to fertilize the eggs. Typically, what they told me is that only 70 to 80% of what you extract is actually a viable egg. And then you fertilize them. And only 50% of those fertilized eggs are healthy enough to even implant. And then if you factor in genetic testing, say you're trying to filter out, I don't know, the BRCA1 cancer gene, so we don't have to give this to my future children at some point, then that might even be even less. And so a lot of people don't want to think about that, is what she said. And I am the absolute opposite. I want to know as much information, as much as possible, all the time, so that I can make educated, informed decisions for that will work for the rest of my life. Because if I end up with having no viable embryos, then we know. And if we know that if I end up going through menopause, that we're going to have to look at other options. I don't want to just have 5 eggs sitting in a freezer somewhere with this idea that we'll be able to use them and then find out 2 years from now that, oh, by the way, none of them are viable. I don't know. I don't like that at all. It sounds terrible. So the fact that I have the IVF coverage now is amazing. And so my partner and I made the decision that we were going to do the embryo freezing instead of egg freezing. One of the other benefits to doing embryo freezing instead of egg freezing is that when you have the embryo, they can do genetic testing prior to freezing, or they can do a biopsy and start genetic testing on the embryo prior to defrosting and getting ready to use it, and they can learn a lot about these embryos. Do they have any major illnesses, major diseases? And because of my BRCA1 cancer gene, I can actually do a specialized test to see if these embryos have that, which is huge, absolutely huge, in terms of hopefully making sure that if we have a choice in the matter, we are not implanting an embryo later that has this horrible cancer gene. And I did my first scan, and unfortunately, as with all of my recent health issues, nothing has turned out well. But it could be worse. It could be worse. So they did a scan, and she says, well, you have 5 follicles. I said, so what does that mean? She says, well, 5 is not a good number. Keep in mind, I already had one of my ovaries removed, so I only have one ovary. So that 10, 20 follicles per ovary that many women will have, I only have one ovary, and I only have 5 follicles during the initial scan. And she says, this is a little concerning, especially given those percentages. 70 to 80% of that is only 3 to 4 eggs. And then we're going to fertilize them, and then potentially only 50% are viable. That literally only leaves you with 1 or 2 viable embryos to go in the freezer. I said, you know what? It is what it is. It didn't feel good, admittedly. It feels like my body is failing me in every step of the way. But at least we will know. And frankly, we could just use a donor egg if we really wanted to make our own and have some way better genetics than I'm able to provide anyway. But anyway, so that was disappointing. We ended up having to go through a full cycle. So we had to restart the process. She had to initiate menstruation, and then essentially 2 to 3 weeks from then, we started looking at the follicles again. They gave me some hormones. I have had to learn to inject myself. I hate needles. I mean, I'm kind of over them now, but I still hate them. I have had to inject into my belly over and over and over again. Medication 1, medication 2, medication 3, so many drugs, so many needles. My poor tummy looks like a war zone. It's very sad. So as we prepare to do the full cycle, one of the things she gave me was a hormone injection, I believe, which was designed to start my menstrual cycle, give it very clear time, dates, and to help hopefully stimulate some more egg follicle production. And it was the first time I was supposed to inject myself, and I couldn't do it. So I was visiting my Auntie Cheryl after my doctor's appointment. So I get into the house and I said, I need your help. She goes, okay. I said, I need to do an injection. Have you ever injected anyone before? And she goes, I haven't, but this will be fun. She was very excited. She was very excited about the prospect of getting to stick needles in me. I don't know if that says anything about our relationship, but it was very amusing. So she got very excited. She pulls out the sanitizer. We sanitized my belly, and she got everything ready. And we read the instructions together, and sure enough, she throws the needle in there, does the thing, and I've been injected. Done. Magic. The end. That was the first one. So we get two and a half weeks later, and I do my first scan, and oh my goodness, there was 9 follicles. I was so relieved that maybe we'll get some more eggs. Maybe we'll be able to get some viable embryos. After all, more than 1 or 2. Anyhow, so I was very excited. There were 9 follicles that could potentially turn into eggs. And I was very optimistic. Maybe we'll get 9. That will help with the numbers. Unfortunately, that is not what happened, but let me go in order here. So we do that first check, and she says, okay, now you get to start the injections. They gave me this piece of paper. 2 or 3 times a day, I have to give myself injections in the tummy of these different medications. And it was at that point I realized that I can't go visit Auntie Cheryl 2 or 3 times a day. I need to figure this shit out myself. So she says, as soon as you get home today, you're going to do the first injection. I wasn't going home for like 4.5 hours. I was going to lunch with my dear friend Angela afterwards. So I went to Angela's house and I said, all right, I need your help. If I can't do it myself, I need your help with this injection. And she goes, oh, okay. And she did the same thing. I don't know why people want to poke me with needles, but she was just as excited as Auntie Cheryl was about poking me with the needle and giving me this injection. I guess new experiences. I don't think they really want to cause harm, but it is what it is. Definitely abuse. So the first injection I had to do was what's called, they call it gonal F. Let's see if you can see this on the camera. It's very interesting. It has little numbers on it of how much is in here, but then it has this little dial. Oh my God. Can I be able to see it? See, it has a little 100. This dial, this is how you determine how much medication. And so my dose was 150. Obviously, trust your doctor. I have no idea if that's normal or abnormal, if I'm special in some way. But you turn it to the amount that you need. So you turn it to the 150, and then easy breezy, you pull off the needle cap. You make sure there's just a little bit of the fluid coming out the top, stick it in your belly, and then you do a full compression. See if it'll let me. Do a full compression of the end. This is empty, by the way. I'm just showing you. But it was very interesting. And I was able to do it. I was able to give myself my first injection. And Angela did not get her opportunity. I'm very sorry, Angela, to poke me with a needle. Well, that started a 11-day regime of injections. With the gonal F at 11 a.m. and then one called Menopur at 8 p.m. And this, the Menopur was a trip because I literally had to take 4 of these vials. One of just, it was like a saline, and the other one was of this powder. And what you do is you fill the thing with air, go up, you extract an entire milliliter of fluid, and then you disconnect this entire needle base thing, which, see, it's got a needle at the bottom, and you inject it in the next one, which has a powder in the bottom. Put the fluid in. You're not allowed to shake it. I realized I just shaked it. You're not allowed to shake it. You have to just kind of turn it gently until it disintegrates. You then extract the entire thing, and then you do it again with 3 more vials until you have 3 of these Menopur powders all gathered in 1 milliliter of the saline fluid, or whatever that fluid was called. It was a trip. I felt like I was doing a crazy science experiment that I was utterly unqualified for. But anyway, so you're done with this whole thing. You get all the vial in here, and then you pull this off, and voila la la, you connect the needle. Same thing. And fortunately, most of them are these little tiny needles. You can't even see them. They're super tiny needle. So they actually go in really easily. Both of these needles went in great. And by the way, be careful with your needles. Put them in your sharps container when you're done. But so then 4 days into it, I had to start this 3rd injection, ganirelix, also at 8 p.m. Oh my God, the needle was like 3 times as thick. And fortunately, I didn't have to mix anything. There was no fancy dials. It came pre-made in a pack, and you literally just pull this out of the thing and inject it, and you're done. At least I didn't have to think about it. Oh, but that needle, oh my God. I do not like needles. I think it's good that I got used to the first 2 really thin needles first before they introduced this one to the mix, because I don't know if I would have been able to do it. I would have had to ask for help or something because it was not great. And then 2 days before the extraction, I had to do this 4th injection called Pregnil. And I don't actually remember what the actual medication is. That's the brand name, is the Pregnil. And that one too hurt like hell, putting that in my body. Oh my God. But it was another one I had to mix the vials and do all sciencey, be all sciencey, experimenty about it. So that was fascinating, but it sucked. And let me just tell you, clearly there's hormones and all these things, because I was emotional. I mean, I felt like I was on an emotional roller coaster for almost the entirety of 10 or 12 days of this process. It was not fun. My poor partner had to deal with me being super stressed out and super emotional. But it's done. Yesterday morning was the extraction, so we had to be at the doctor's at 7 a.m. So we were up at 5, drove to the hospital, it was an hour and a half away. I get into, the fancy gown, and they do the extraction. It is quite a trip. So it's really interesting. You actually get into the operating room, and there's this table that looks a lot like a standard going in for your OBGYN pap smear appointment, except that the leg rests are very heavy duty with padding, and you put your legs in both sides, and then they actually have these straps that they wrap around so that your legs can't move. And then you're laying on the table, and they actually put straps over your chest as well so that you don't slide off during the procedure. So I've told you before, I'm not responsive to a lot of pain medications. This is the first time I've woken up mid-procedure. The doctor was not done, and I started chatting with the anesthesiologist, and I remember distinctly him talking to me for a minute, and then he goes, I think I'm going to give you a little more medication so you go back to sleep, okay? Okay, that's fine. And so he gives me another dose and knocks my butt out again. And then I get out of the operating room. The surgery procedure, whatever you want to call it, is super fast. It's literally only 20, 30 minutes. They have to go in. They go in with a needle. They go into the ovary, and then this needle kind of suctions out the follicles, which hopefully, of course, have eggs in them. And they suction them out. They go into their petri dish, and then they try to fertilize them with the semen that has been collected at the same time from my partner. But so it's a pretty simple procedure. But I get out, I am waking up, and apparently I also woke up even after that second dose of whatever he used to knock my ass out. I actually woke up way faster than I expected, because the next thing I recall is being a little groggy, sitting up in bed, and started checking my phone, make sure Matt knows, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Everything good? And the nurse walks in, she goes, oh, you're wide awake already. Yeah, am I not supposed to be? And she goes, normally it takes a little longer for people to wake up that much. Oh, okay. So I was very excited about 9 follicles. Unfortunately, as we went through the process, only 5 of the follicles started growing. So what they needed, I don't know the actual measurement, what it is, but they measure the size. You go in, I had to go in for ultrasounds almost every other day to check the size of these follicles and if they're growing, if they're on track or not on track. And from day 1, there was one follicle that was distinctly bigger than the others. But after that first appointment where they said we see 9 follicles, come on in 4 days later, that 4 days later appointment, only 5 of the follicles had grown. And so there was 1 larger follicle and 4 smaller follicles. And they said, yeah, basically we think you're going to get 5 follicles, and hopefully 70 to 80% of them will be viable eggs. And we just kept watching, and I was hoping that maybe something's hidden behind hiding behind in there somewhere. And sure enough, about 2 days before the procedure, they were doing a scan, and they found 2 more follicles had started growing, but they were teeny tiny, and essentially they said they're not going to be large enough to be a viable or to have an egg inside them that's going to work. So I still ended up with 5 after all of that, unfortunately. So the good news is I got a call today after the procedure, and they said that they were able to extract 5 eggs and that 4 of them were able to fertilize, which is frankly quite almost exactly on track with what they expected in terms of 70 to 80% of the eggs being viable once fertilized. So am I disappointed I didn't get more? Of course. But at the same time, it is to be expected. So I got 4. Fingers crossed, hopefully at least 2 of them end up being healthy enough for freezing, and we'll see what happens. But that in mind, as much as this experience was filled with lots of needles, and it was very emotional, I'm very happy that we did this, because we'll know within a couple of weeks, we'll know if their eggs were healthy, we'll know the genetic test results and what, the viability of these embryos, and we'll know. Knowledge is power, right? And at least we'll be able to make a plan, a theoretical plan, assuming, of course, that I do go into menopause during this chemo process and I'm unable to produce naturally, which realistically, there is a huge benefit of doing this, even if I am if I don't go into menopause, because I'll be able to do this genetic testing and potentially control passing this gene down to any offspring. So even if I am able to reproduce naturally, this is something to heavily consider if somebody can afford it. And like I said, I'm very fortunate to have this IVF coverage through my work. It would be nice to end this gene in my family. It would be very nice. So anyhow, everyone's situation is of course different. I think we made the best decision for us in this situation, and I think this is the best decision for me to feel comfortable with whatever's happening next. But what about you? What are you doing? If you're in the same situation I am and contemplating egg freezing or embryo freezing or not doing IVF at all and just see what naturally happens with your body and if everything goes back to normal at the end, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? What are the pros and cons for you and your own situation? Would love to hear, would love to share. With that being said, thanks all for listening in. I'm Janae Cherie, and I am loving telling you guys my stories. I hope you're enjoying them as well. If you are, please click the subscribe button, and I'll see you at the next one.